When it comes to the Stranger Things finale, I don't think it was horrific like it had the potential of being after Volume 2 was released, but it definitely didn't go in the direction that I would have liked it to have gone in. Personally, I didn't really like the way the Mind Flayer was revealed. I didn't like how easy it was for Vecna to be defeated. I didn't like the way some of the deaths occurred, and I wasn't a fan of the 45-minute epilogue right at the end of the final episode. So with that, I wanted to have a go at writing the ending of Stranger Things and share how I feel Stranger Things should have ended. So let's get into it. Here's my ending to Stranger Things. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The fight with Vecna and the reveal of the Mind Flayer. The final boss fight is something that I thought was a bit disappointing, and in my mind, I would have done it completely differently. I wouldn't have had Henry being revealed to have needed to have been connected to the Mind Flayer. I'd have still had him having that telepathic conversation with Will like he did, but instead of the context of the conversation being about how the Mind Flayer needed Henry, I'd have had it being said that Henry Krill got to a level of darkness where he was actually able to control the Mind Flayer. We know that Henry Krill went to the Abyss when he was younger following the events in the cave, and within the stage play it was said that Henry had always tried to control the Mind Flayer but wasn't able to. This is then when I'd have had it connect back to Season 4, and the scene that we saw here with Henry back in the Abyss following Eleven sending him there would be him finally getting control of the Mind Flayer. This would provide clarity to this scene, and I think it'd be a nice callback. This would also explain why his lair would be the way that it was within the Abyss. The Mind Flayer would be in a state of hibernation because Vecna would have fully controlled it, meaning that he was able to channel the complete darkness of the Abyss and answer why he came back and was stronger than what he ever was before. There'd essentially be no other dark entity in Vecna's way. The beating heart would have also been the subtle hint that it was the Mind Flayer too. This would ultimately provide an element of surprise for the group because after they defeat Vecna in a battle that resembled the intensity of Season 4 Episode 9 and the brutality of Season 5 Episode 4, they'd think that they were successful in completing the plan. But with Vecna being killed, that would then essentially release the hold that he had on the Mind Flayer, and that would then be where it revealed itself, and the group would then have to fight off against the Flayer. It would also transform into its shadowy entity too. I wasn't really a fan of the fantasy style look that it adopted, and I much preferred the darkness that it embodied in the shadow form. Its physical form could almost be justified because Vecna gaining control could symbolize it being petrified. Before Vecna would end up being killed, I wouldn't necessarily want a moment of redemption, but I'd have liked to have seen the Henry Krill from when he was younger, the one that wasn't plagued with darkness from the Mind Flayer coming to the forefront, and us seeing that manipulation was the very thing that led him to be the evil person that he was. It would shine a light on how the likes of Will and Eleven could have quite comfortably turned into somebody like Vecna if they didn't have the support system and the love and care from the group around them. From here, an absence from the finale that we got would be rectified, and an army of Demogorgans, Demodogs, and Demobats would return as they'd all be getting controlled by the Mind Flayer and would be going after the group. This would also see the group heading into the Upside Down from the Abyss, where they'd be looking to escape, and in this moment, we'd see Will being connected to the Hive Mind in order to do his best to fend it off and keep the Mind Flayer in the Abyss. This would allow the group to escape, and instead of Eleven being the person that was sacrificing herself for the group, nobody would. But there'd be a twist. The bomb would have been set onto the timer by Hopper and Murray like planned, and we'd have seen Will making it out with all of the others. However, the Upside Down would be destroyed, and with Will holding a connection with it like nobody else did, and due to him being connected to it because he was holding off the creatures from entering the right side up, he'd end up being killed due to that connection being active. This would also mean that the Mind Flayer wouldn't necessarily be killed because it would be in the Abyss, and it would simply be trapped there with no bridge of the Upside Down keeping it connected to the real world. It's a dark entity from an ungodly world, and I don't think it needs to be killed, but the idea of it still lying there with the capability of one day returning is a haunting thought to think about. Carly's death. Now, I know that many of us wanted a large death in the show, but Carly's wasn't quite big enough for me, and with the way that it happened, I don't think it was dramatic enough either. For the longest of times, it felt like Carly was going to be pitted up against Hopper due to their differences in beliefs, and that was going to bring about Hopper or Carly's end. This is exactly how I would have had it. Instead of Carly lowering the weapon at Hopper when she told Eleven that Vecna had got inside of her mind, instead, Hopper would have tried to fight back, which would have begun a brawl between the two. He'd have seen how Carly was trying to turn Eleven against him, and he wouldn't have been able to have kept his mouth shut. This is then when Carly would have utilized her abilities, and Eleven would have seen the pain that she would have been putting Hopper in. Carly, despite not being an evil from the Hawkins lab and her simply being an equivalent to Eleven, this would show Eleven that Carly would never be able to let go of what happened and that she'd always have that streak and appetite for revenge and violence inside of her. Hopper has always been like a father to Eleven, and we heard that in the monologue that she said to him, so in that moment, Eleven would have saved Hopper and ultimately killed Carly in the process. Eleven wouldn't be happy about it, but it would have simply put her in a position where she had to save either a family member from her past or somebody from her present and future. With Hopper being a part of her life that allowed her to feel accepted and have a sense of belonging, that's why she'd ultimately choose him. This would then make Carly's death far more dramatic in my opinion, and it would also justify the decision for her to be brought back. She'd have been trying to manipulate Eleven's mind, which would almost be like something from her past, dragging her back to it to when it was full of manipulation from the likes of Dr. Brenner and also Henry Creel. Plus, as well as that, it would also provide a threat to Hopper's life, so the tension and dramatic nature of it all would have been far more better than what we got. 11 doesn't die. I wouldn't have had 11 sacrificing herself and not returning from the Upside Down. Instead, her survival would have simply been the very thing and symbolized how life wasn't fair, easy, and that there'd always be a possibility of something bad happening and the gateway potentially being opened again. However, even though all of that would have been at the forefront, it would show that you can overcome these obstacles and life does go on. When the group would have returned from the Upside Down after Will was killed, instead of having a 45-minute long epilogue, I'd have had the secondary battle beginning, which would have focused on 11 versus the military, and specifically Dr. K, giving that character some actual purpose. This is then where we'd have seen the military actually being defeated, Dr. K being killed, and the project being wiped out for good. They wouldn't just be written out as if they'd just decided to leave because 11 was killed. I'd have some of that epilogue runtime taken up with a battle actually taking place between the group and the military, and with Will's death being at the heart of it, somebody that 11 cared about. It would almost show how that togetherness and somebody from the present day who she cared about being harmed and killed by something that was from her past. It would again pit those two time periods from her life up against one another, and the present day and future would win. The backstory of the cave. A sad reality of the finale is that we never really got the true backstory of Henry going to Dimension X or the Abyss. This is something that I'd have changed in the finale. We did get Henry being exposed to the darkness of the Abyss through the stone, but I'd have included around a 10-minute section of Henry being transported there, which would have got across the true effect of how he got his powers, rather than it just seeming like he had this stone and it made him become bad. The problem I have with Henry's backstory is that in order to truly understand it, you have to see the stage play The First Shadow, which is only showing in 2 locations around the world, the West End and on Broadway. I just feel it ostracizes a large part of the Stranger Things audience, so I'd have definitely cleared up Henry encountering the Mind Flayer in the Abyss and provided some clarity. Whilst I'm not saying my idea of the ending to Stranger Things is the perfect way for it to finish, in my mind, I just feel like the stakes would have been a little bit higher than what we got. Will being given powers and his connection to the Hive Mind in episode 4 of season 5 would have more weight behind it. And I also feel like the twist of the Mind Flayer being this secondary villain that they needed to fight after they thought that they killed Vecna and won would make the final battle seem even more epic. I just wasn't really a fan of them fighting off against Vecna and the Mind Flayer at the same time. When it comes to Stranger Things, I think the show will always be remembered fondly, and even though the ending didn't tank like many other fan-favourite shows over the years have, it provided one that was just okay. Ultimately, I think it's a shame because Stranger Things always felt like it was a cut above the rest, and with what we got at the end of Season 5 Volume 1, it just felt like we could have been given something that was far better than what we got at the end of Volume 3. So, there you have it, how Stranger Things Season 5 should have ended. If you want to see more videos on Stranger Things Season 5, then check the playlist below, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. What did you think of the ending? Share your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for tuning into the video, and I'll see you in the next one.